After finding Tales from the Pizzaplex Book 7 in an Indigo early, I began yesterday doing my summaries on Tiger Rock. My summary for the first story, of course Tiger Rock, was released yesterday, and today I'm doing a summary on the second story, The Monty Within. The final story, Bleeding Heart, and the epilogue will be getting summaries as well, so stay tuned for those, but for now, let's not waste any more time, just sit back and relax, and enjoy The Monty Within. The main character of The Monty Within is Kane, a senior in high school who has a girlfriend named Sienna and a 13-year-old brother who basically worshipped him named Archer. The story begins with his alarm clock jolting him awake after a dream and realizing that he was gonna be late. Kane immediately hopped in the shower and thought about the day ahead of him. He had to look over his brother Archer's project about the physics of a baseball, and then he had to go pick up Sienna and get them to school. Then talk to his English teacher about his essay, go to his morning classes, go to the school's woodshop at lunch, go to his afternoon classes, work on his essay, and then go on the date he promised Sienna, and then hang out with his brother after that. He essentially had 3 days worth of work to do in just this one day, and he wished that there were more than one of him. We cut to the date between Sienna and Kane, which was at Freddy Fazbear's Mega Pizzaplex, surprise surprise. Kane was spending some time discussing his senior essay, which was all about how the left brain was basically like Siri or Alexa, but for our brain, a non-sentient intelligence that acts like a computer that manages our lives. Meanwhile, the right brain is our actual consciousness, the side that makes you unique, the part that the walkers in The Walking Dead don't have functioning. They begin to eat their pizza when Kane pulls out a gift for Sienna. Today was their 1-year anniversary of their first date, which was at the old Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria, which was now shut down, so the Pizzaplex was the next best thing. I find this very interesting as it's unclear which pizzeria this would have been that would have shut down. I would say it's possible that this story takes place in the first year of the Pizzaplex and the pizzeria in question is Freddy Fazbear's Pizza Place, but that doesn't really work, because it seems more likely to just be like a random Freddy's that was open at the same time as the Pizzaplex, especially because of the fact that the story actually seems to be later on in the Pizzaplex's runtime, because Bonnie is not a thing anymore. And we'll get to that a little bit later anyway. So, as I was saying, Sienna loves the gift, which is a sloth-shaped pendant because she likes sloths a lot, and then we move on to after Kane has finished his essay, which is titled The AI Within. All that was left to do now was morph the essay into an oral report that he had to do, but he turned in the essay about an hour before it was due, which is very relatable. The year was going by so fast, and somehow he was already doing his oral thesis. He basically explained that scientists have concluded that half of a brain is basically a whole mind, and that if you were missing half a brain, then you could still be a normal person, and that this has happened to someone before, and everyone claimed they were acting normal. This means that if you have an entire brain, you technically have 2 minds. Each side of the brain is individual and processes things completely separately. At the same time, the left brain controls the right side of the body and the right brain controls the left side of the body. When the brain is separated, people have 2 different sets of personality traits and make completely separate decisions without the other side even knowing. A woman who had a stroke had her left brain go essentially offline, and it took her 8 years to recover. This all displayed how the right brain functioned without the left brain, which leaves the left brain as the leftover variable, which could be figured out from there. Kinda like times in math when you have to solve for both x and y. You first solve one, and then the other can be solved pretty easily. The left brain basically controls things like speaking, calculating, prioritizing, and just being productive in general. The left brain is like a non-sentient AI, while the right brain actually is sentient. When you lose the left brain, you also lose some of the stuff that was processed throughout your life, like negative self-talk, and if it were to run by itself without the right brain, it would essentially run programs based on everything it's taken in over the years, but who knows whether those things are right or wrong. If the AI's data isn't good, then it can transform into something bad. If you really think about this, it kind of perfectly describes the Mimic, which copies everything around it, but that includes all the negative stuff it observes, not only the good. As Kane explained all this, he managed to make the audience laugh a bunch of times, and the thesis seemed to be going well, but when he presented his theory, while the audience was almost entirely engaged, towards the end some of the audience began frowning, but they were all still engaged. At the end of every oral thesis, a teacher or whatever named Miss Stockton would come on stage and offer the opportunity for the audience to give comments, which Kane was a bit worried about. Miss Stockton asked the audience to raise their hands if they believed what Kane had explained, and though Kane had expected to see a lot of hands, he only saw a couple dozen relative to the hundreds of people in the room. Even Sienna's wasn't up. A guy named Reg said that it seemed like he was saying that all the bad stuff we observe goes into this computer in our brains, like how people say that video games cause violence. And a cheerleader named Candy then stood up and said that while Kane did lots of research and should get a good mark, it doesn't really make sense that a computer in our head makes us do bad stuff, which isn't really the message she was trying to get across. She was very much oversimplifying it. More people came in with similar takes, and Kane just tried to mask his hurt feelings by telling himself that it's just what the computer within is making him act as. Not gonna lie, I think he would have made himself a lot happier if he just, considered it a canon event, and then I think he would have been fine, but whatever. Now that the thesis was over, there were still 6 weeks left of school, and Kane wanted to spend as much time with Sienna as possible because they weren't going to the same college and would have to manage a long-distance relationship. One night, he was gonna go to the movies with Sienna, but Archer wanted to go to the Pizzaplex after they ate dinner, which Kane made as he'd been teaching himself to cook since their mom had long hours and their dad wasn't in the picture. Kane begrudgingly agreed, assuring himself that Sienna would understand as she had a younger sister and she knew what it was like. So they went to the Pizzaplex, and Kane was getting a headache from all the flashing lights and sounds and stuff that were in the area, so he and Archer headed over to grab ice cream. Suddenly though, Kane noticed something out of a corner of his eye. A machine that was called Phascade Tag Team, which caught his eyes, and he wanted to try it out and see what it was all about. It was in an enclosed area that had a sign reading, "Groundbreaking technology allows you to be your own partner." And the game was basically where you and your team would face off against people on the other side of the Pizzaplex, probably like while you were in the Phascade, while they're in the Superstarcade or something, and you would essentially choose your Fazbear character, and you would be able to control them with your thoughts and intentions. A very interesting concept, as it was similar to what Kane's essay was about, but as a game. You would basically control your animatronic, and then there would be an AI, like another animatronic, that would be on your team, and then they would essentially, read your mind. Kind of. Not really at the same time, but that's kind of like what the message was. And, well, we'll see how it goes. Archer chose Bonnie, and Kane picked Orville Elephant, one of the lesser-known animatronics that was in the Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria Simulator game. This is very interesting, as it tells us that the first 3 FNaF games are not the only ones made as games. Steve obviously made the first 3 FNaF games, while the rest were made by Fazbear Entertainment themselves, and it also confirms that the first 3 games are not only games, as they were still real events in the series, which is known from the fact that FNaF 6 is now shown to be a game, even though the events of the FNaF 6 fire and the game itself are confirmed to have happened due to the pizza place underneath the Pizzaplex. Anyway, continuing on with the story. They chose their characters, and a Glamrock Chica avatar and a Montgomery Gator avatar popped up on the screen. Kane knew Monty to be the bassist of the Pizzaplex, who was the most aggressive and egotistical, so much so that when he would lose in a game, he would say, "How can I lose? I'm so handsome," which is absolutely 100% a reference to Security Breach Fury's Rage, where if you die as Monty, he says, "How could this happen? I'm so good looking." I just find that kind of funny. Monty here was essentially Kane's partner, and it seemed to be an AI that would do what he needed him to do based on context and intention. So as Kane began arming Orville with food, Monty followed suit. Monty did do his own thing though, but as the game progressed, Kane noticed that Monty seemed to be mimicking what Kane was doing. I wonder what that could mean. I really wonder what that groundbreaking technology mentioned about this game was. Totally not the Mimic program, right? It seems like a lot of these stories are involving the Mimic more and more, which makes sense since Fazbear Frights did the same thing with Eleanor. All in all, Kane had a fun time with the game, which was essentially a food fight in a cafeteria setting, and Kane did pretty well on it. Whenever Kane would study his own actions and strategize, Monty would freeze. And then when Kane went idle, Monty would mimic Kane's gameplay. It was almost as if Monty was connected to his mind. Kane also noticed a yellow circle above his character that moved sporadically like a brainwave. Their time was eventually up, and they went to get ice cream, but Kane couldn't stop wondering. It felt like the game's AI had taken advantage of the research Kane put into his essay, as if it was hijacking a piece of his mind. Now, we're talking about an AI that mimics you, and we're talking about an AI hijacking his mind. The same AI here, right? Sound familiar? Yeah, glitch trap. Anyway, we cut to the next day, where Kane's mind is occupied with the Phascade tag team and decided to go back. Sienna was a bit frustrated with him at the moment, and Archer was with his friend Miles, so... Wait, Miles? Canon event? Oh my god. Anyway, sorry. I I didn't even process that when I was writing the script, but as I just read that right now, I found that funny because I mentioned the canon event thing earlier. Anyway, I'm just gonna move on. So, Kane went to the Pizzaplex by himself to play the game again. He picked Orville again to see if he could replicate some of the results from yesterday, and Monty strangely seemed to have recognized him in Orville. Kane focused solely on the game for about 10 minutes while he noticed that the light above his character's head, which began as being very bright, was now flickering a little bit. Kane looked closer at the screen and saw that the circle of light was actually on a circular heavy panel, which covered whatever the source of the light was. He gripped the panel and tried to shift it, but it didn't work. So he began hitting the panel, and as he did, sparks shot off the machine and the game itself went dark. The other kids in the area looked up at him and yelled that he broke the game. Kane decided he wouldn't find anything else today and left the Pizzaplex as the kids still shouted accusations at him. He ended up getting home around the same time as his mom, and she asked if he had gone out with Sienna and eaten, and he told her that he did. He then heard a taunting voice in his head say, "Liar, liar, pants on fire," which was very strange because he was only answering the eating part of the question, so he wasn't lying. And it was also weird because he never had thoughts like these kinds of taunting tones. He heard this voice in his head a few times, and he found it very strange. He was feeling very tired and was about to tell his mom that he was going up to bed, but he suddenly heard himself say he was going for a run. He didn't know why he said this though, but then he said goodnight to his mom and heard the words in his head, "Run, run, run," which is something that Monty often says. It seems like that AI within was replaced with the mimic in the form of Monty, hence the title, The Monty Within. Kane had other intrusive thoughts ranging from things that Monty often said or destructive, rageful things that Monty would do. But Kane couldn't figure out why he had these intrusive thoughts. When he went up to his room, he strangely found those thoughts being critical and bored of the stuff in his room, like the color of the walls and the photos of his family, friends, and Sienna. Eventually, he had enough and looked at himself in the mirror, noticing not much other than a tightness under his eyes. He mostly looked normal, except for a look in his eye that displayed condescending and critical amusement, as if he was looking back at himself with those thoughts in mind. His eyes had a hint of gold overlaying the normal brown, but then suddenly he strangely winked at himself, which caught him completely off guard. He tried to convince himself that he was just tired, but the voice in his head insisted that he was lying, also repeating the words "run, run, run" that he'd heard earlier. Instead of dwelling on this, he simply went to bed and quickly fell asleep. The next day was a Friday, and Kane struggled to make it through the day because the intrusive thoughts just wouldn't stop, intruding. When Sienna told him about a pimple that she had, he said that it wasn't noticeable. Meanwhile, the voice in his head said it was bigger than Chica's cupcake, which is odd because not only did the voice connect to a Fazbear character, but it also used phrases that Kane didn't even know what they meant. Kane and Sienna were currently on a date at the farmer's market, which they did often, and Sienna found a miniature sloth made of seashells. It wasn't too expensive, so Kane was able to buy it when suddenly his intrusive thoughts won, and he told her that she should put back the sloth and turn to the beauty products, telling Sienna that he would buy her something for the huge zit on her nose. This, understandably, made Sienna quite upset, and Kane tried to apologize and say that he didn't know what had gotten into him. But he did know. He had figured it out. He tried to get her to let him drive her home, but she stormed off and away from Kane. Kane didn't think that he was in the right condition to drive her home anyway, though, because he had figured out that he was possessed. He figured out that the food court game had somehow caused Monty to possess him, but in a sort of way that Glitchtrap does it, which further confirms that Glitchtrap is the Mimic, since the Mimic is this Monty. Essentially, Kane is still himself, but Monty is just in his head influencing his thoughts and actions. He is the same person and he has his own thoughts. The voice of Monty in his head, though separate from his own thoughts, was still very much there. He knew Monty now inhabited his brain, he just hoped that it wouldn't be permanent. The next day, Saturday, he had a baseball game, and on the bus, he tried calling Sienna like 10 times, but she wouldn't answer, and then he wondered if he still had a girlfriend. Monty in his head said, "Who needs a girlfriend?" And then Kane out loud said, "I do," leading to a short, funny interaction with his friend and the bus driver. During the actual game, Kane was able to stay focused with no Monty interference, but towards the end, he realized that his team was down by 1 point, and in order to win, he had to hit the ball. He's gotten almost half the points in the game, and his teammates weren't doing quite as well, so it was all up to him now. Kane knew that the pitcher was going to throw a knuckleball, whatever that means. I have no idea what baseball is all about. I've never actually like played a legitimate game of it, so I don't really know what knuckleball and fastballs are. But like that's what's happening. Kane knew that the pitcher was going to throw a knuckleball, but Monty, for some reason, insisted that he was going to throw a fastball. Kane continued to insist that it would be a knuckleball, and he was right. But because Monty thought that it would be a fastball, he'd prepared Kane's body for a fastball, causing him to miss and losing them the game. As more time passed, Kane decided that the Monty voice in his head wasn't the worst thing in the world. Like, it was really bad, but he could deal with it. It was difficult in some situations, though. For example, when he was washing his hands in the bathroom, and a nerdy kid in his class named Gerald walked in and said hi. Kane always tried to be nice to him, but Monty wasn't so considerate, saying mean things about him and even trying to stick Kane's tongue out at Gerald. He couldn't trust himself enough to open his mouth because he didn't know what would come out, and he felt a little bad because this seemed to be misconstrued by Gerald, making him think that he was just ignoring him, and that kind of made Gerald feel a little sad. But Kane tried to be nice, as nice as possible, without saying anything. This proved to be pretty difficult, though. When Kane finished washing his hands, Monty restricted him from moving his hands as he cupped water as if he was about to throw it at Gerald. Kane yelled to cut it out, and Gerald was very confused, and Kane simply told him that he was talking to himself, as he had a lot on his mind. He left the bathroom and tried to get a grip before getting in line to grab his food. He tried to grab salad, but his right hand kept veering off the beaten path and towards Jell-O, which he didn't want. He used his left hand to try to grab the salad, which he did, but he couldn't put the Jell-O down with his right hand. Suddenly, it flung at his face. Kane looked around to see if anyone had noticed, and a couple girls did, but they didn't comment on it. Kane was around the top of the hierarchy of the school, so people wouldn't really comment if he did something weird. Just as he was thinking about that, though, Monty said, "You think? What if you do this?" And before Kane could stop it, he flipped the salad off his tray, flinging lettuce on his shirt. Then he reached for the macaroni salad and lifted it and poured it on top of his head. Monty made Kane do all kinds of weird things with the food, embarrassing himself and giving Monty a bunch of laughs. He apologized to the cafeteria worker there and turned around to find a bunch of people were now staring at him, ranging from randos to Sienna and her friends to his teammates. Essentially, he looked like an idiot. He lied that it was a social experiment to get the eyes off him, and just decided not to eat anything. He couldn't risk something like that happening again. Later that day at practice, his teammates pressed him about it, which was annoying, and Kane had to resist kicking dirt and spitting at them. Monty made Kane say that he was trying to start a food fight, and the teammates questioned how throwing food on himself would accomplish that. Life with Monty was getting a bit harder, and interacting with people wasn't easy anymore. But while he did a lot of weird stuff, what he said to Sienna was the worst, and he had to get her to forgive him. He headed into the woodshop to work on his project for Sienna, which was a cutting board, as she'd been interested in cooking lately, but the board was shaped like a sloth. He'd made a sloth template and began cutting it out, but then Monty said that sloths are boring and that a sun was more fun, and he basically ruined the whole thing. We cut to Kane waking up in the morning 20 minutes before his alarm. As he had many times already, he called Sienna only to get her voicemail, and he began leaving a message saying that he'd been saying things that he doesn't mean, and he luckily ended the call before saying that she stuck up for being mad at him. After taking a shower and shaving, Kane grabbed the blow dryer, but Monty stopped him and said that a mohawk would be more fun. Kane tried to say that he was in control, not Monty, but then Monty said that Kane is in trouble now. He grabbed a razor and held it up towards Kane's head, almost touching his hair. But Kane smacked it out of his hand with his other hand, and it went flying across the room. Then he grabbed the blow dryer again with his left hand, thinking he won the battle, until he saw his right hand was holding scissors and pointing them towards Kane's hair. He reached out his left hand to take the scissors out of his right hand until they were lodged into his hand. He ended up in the ER to stitch up his hand and didn't make it to school until after lunch. However, from then on, Monty seemed dormant. He didn't really do anything, at least not until after baseball practice. Kane was so excited to go home, but for some reason, he was heading in the opposite direction of his car. He was walking down the hallways inside the school. He asked Monty what he was doing, but he didn't respond. Kane quickly realized that Monty was taking him to the woodshop. He continued to ask Monty what he was doing, but to no avail. Kane sat down on the plywood that lay on the metal rollers and started getting concerned. He tried pushing himself off, but instead reached out and turned on the power for the saw, causing the saw blade to start spinning and sounding in a high-pitched whine. Kane could hear Monty in his head, saying, "I've tried to play along with you, but you're no fun. You need to go away." Now Kane was very concerned, yelling the question, "What do you mean?" He continued to yell for Monty to stop as he moved closer to the spinning saw blade. He was able to see that the saw blade would slice through the center of his head. splitting his brain in two halves. The left brain, which Monty controlled, and the right brain, which Kane controlled. Kane felt the saw cut through the skin on his head, and there was nothing he could do to save himself as the table shook as the saw hit his skull, and the words rock and roll echoed in his head. But that is the end of The Monty Within, a very interesting story that started off pretty boring but ended up pretty good. I think it's pretty clear that the Mimic is what was in the arcade, and that's what possessed Kane, and I find it cool that since the Mimic in the form of Monty was taking the place of the left brain, it was able to control Kane's right arm, which is why Kane was able to knock things out of his right hand or grab things with his left hand without being restricted. I like the attention to detail there, because the left brain controls the right brain and the right brain controls the left brain. So since Kane was in control of the right brain, he could control his left arm, while Monty was controlling his right arm. I really like that attention to detail, and I think this story pretty much sums up that the Mimic and Glitchtrap are 100% one and the same, since Monty in the game was mimicking Kane, and then Monty possessed Kane just like Glitchtrap. And I also find it interesting that in Tiger Rock, the Monty Within, and the epilogue for this book, the Mimic is the focus. So will the final story, Bleeding Heart, also be about the Mimic? I guess we'll find out in tomorrow's video. But I hope you all enjoyed this video. If you did, then make sure to leave a like and subscribe if you want to, and let me know how you feel about this story, and also stay tuned for the next 2 summaries for the stories in this book. But that's all, and I'll see you all in the next video. Bye, guys!